excursion into the Touhou mobile games last week. This time, we're looking at some of the most popular Doujin manga, which is the majority of the actual fan works. Now, there is an absolutely insane amount of Touhou Doujin out there. Just mind-boggling amounts. And that's not even going into the gigabytes upon gigabytes upon gigabytes of porn, which I'm not even touching at all in this retrospective. So, in order to actually get this out the door in any type of timely manner, I had to limit to 7 manga that I feel are popular or important or just kinda got my interest. So without further ado, let's get started looking at them. First up is the first canon manga, written by Zune no less, entitled Silent Sinner in Blue. It's a sort of sequel to Imperishable Night, with the Touhous making their way to the moon in a crude rocket in order to stop the Moon Kingdom from being invaded by a familiar adversary. It's pretty lengthy for a doujin, running some 20 or some chapters, but man does this one have some problems. First, the good. The art is pretty darn good, looking downright professional in fact. It's also fun to see the characters represented as Zune intended instead of the multitude of ways the fans like to characterize them. It's also cool to see a serious in-canon story in a sea of gag manga, but my praise sadly ends here. The pacing of this tale is just horrible. It spends more than half of its run on a build-up that just never delivers. With the entire premise being that some of the most famous characters journey to the moon, you don't really get to see much of the moon. In fact, the leads never make it to the capital, instead being defeated and thrown back to Earth almost immediately after arriving. Worse, much of the time is spent with characters that barely mean anything to the overall narrative at hand. It's just a clumsy story with little payoff for your investment. Next we have Abba of the Moon, Abba of the Earth, which is a 4-koma following Team Moon Bunny. For those that don't know what a 4-koma is, it's a series of 4-panel gag comics. I've never been much for this style of manga, and while this is amusing, it never reaches laugh out loud levels. It's not terrible, but it's not a lot to keep you reading. The third up is Touhou Battle Royale, which is exactly what it sounds like. Initially, I had high hopes for this one, as the premise of all the characters in the franchise fighting each other to the death is really interesting, and I'd be curious to see who would come out on top. Sadly, what we get is a pretty straight parody of Battle Royale with subpar art. For what it is, it's definitely not horrible, but I just feel it's wasted potential. You also need to be pretty heavy into the fandom to get most of the jokes. Now we have one called Miko Suika, which is another pretty lengthy series. Everyone's favorite lowly alcoholic Oni has decided to up and become a Miko for the Hakure Shrine, and proves to be better at the job than Reimu. Can our league keep the shrine productive and Suika on task without being completely upstaged? Here's an example of taking a pretty simple concept and just running with it, and it works out pretty darn well. The story is simple, the art is competent, and each character feels well utilized. It's good at making you want to continue the adventures of our Miko and Miko in training, and that's a pretty big feat for a gag manga like this. It's not going to blow you away, but does well with what it's set out to do. Speaking of blowing things away, there's A Better Tomorrow, which also has a simple premise. Give the Touhous guns and have 2 teams shoot it out, mostly because Gensokyo's residents get bored really easy. Chock full of parodies and references, you'll really need to be up on your otaku culture to appreciate this one. Even so, it's a well-drawn, self-contained story that doesn't overstay its welcome. Next up is Please Remelia, and no, it's not a Please Teacher parody, thank God. Life is pretty hard for Remelia Scarlet. After her embarrassing defeat at the hands of Reimu and Marissa, she's pretty much lost all of her dignity. Now she acts as Flandre's doujin assistant, Pachuli's guinea pig for weapons quote-unquote inspired by Hellsing, and Sakuya's girl toy. Sick of it all, she constantly looks for ways to recapture her mojo, only to be thwarted again and again. It's an amusing little series, mainly because the Scarlet Devil Mansion team are some of the most interesting characters in the franchise, and just watching them bounce off of each other is interesting. Finally, we have A Strange and Bright Nature Deity, another story written by Zune himself. It follows 3 mischievous fairies on their misadventures in pranking the unsuspecting residents of Gensokyo. It's a fun, lighthearted story that's probably my favorite of the books discussed here, and the only one with direct ties back to the main series. The Great Fairy Wars continued where this manga left off. It's definitely worth a read because of that. Next time, we're doing things a little less formal. I'm going to be watching a small selection of fan videos with you, so I hope you join me next time.